Be me. Friend torrents Black Panther, we're about to watch it. Me. So is this actually good or just overhyped? Him, apparently actually good, haven't watched it. Me, I bet there's basketball, rap and slavery references within the first 2 minutes. Him, PFT I don't think they'd go that far man. Me, no seriously I bet there is. Him, awkward silence and a weird look. We start the movie. 1 minute of sci-fi backstory, includes a reference to slavery. Followed by basketball and rap. My face when.
I don't like doing this. Right off the bat, I gotta say, I don't like doing it. I'm not here to spoil people's fun, but Black Panther was sort of... And I wouldn't feel a need to talk about it if anyone else really was. Not because every overrated movie needs someone to rip into it, but because it's so weird that with this movie, no one really is. See, the media hype around this movie didn't go how I expected it to. When the movie was first announced, what happened was exactly what always happens. The usual suspects started praising it as a progressive masterpiece, treating this 2-hour-long toy commercial for little kids as a historical event on par with the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, while their counterparts were sounding the alarm about yet another race-baiting shitpile, and getting ready to downvote it on any website they can find without even seeing it. But when the movie actually landed in theaters, something I didn't see coming happened. The people I thought would treat it as a masterstroke no matter what, did exactly that, praising the diverse cast that was 95% black and threatening to murder journalists who dared give it a review that would lower its Rotten Tomatoes score. But the people I expected to accuse it of being some sort of SJW propaganda or something stupid like that were nowhere to be found. Sure, the cadre of perpetually sleeping sounding YouTuber movie critics all said it wasn't so great and was just another Marvel movie, and a handful of jackasses made awful reviews that focused solely on nitpicking irrelevant details and continuity errors while constructing arguments that only work if you pretend to have the mental development of a 5-year-old child, so you can pretend to deliberately refuse to understand basic things about the movie. But aside from a handful of complaints about the awful green screen and bad CGI in the last few minutes looking like a pile of crap, and 2 or 3 videos pointing out that Wakanda is basically an alt-right paradise if you ignore the entire ending of a film, something that both YouTube skeptics and the black nationalists who want to pretend Wakanda is a real place desperately wish that they could do, none of the YouTube skeptic alt-righters and right-wingers had anything to say that was actual criticism. No one out of the people you would most expect to attack this thing for no real reason stepped out to say that this movie is bad or at least not so great. Was this movie really that good? Was this film actually so amazing that the rationalist blowhards and white nationalists of YouTube were left in awe of its splendor? I had to find out. So, sometime later, I finally sat down and watched it. I thought to myself that if these people couldn't find anything to nitpick about it to pretend that it's awful, then this movie must be fucking perfect. If these retards who cry foul over every character redesign didn't each upload a 3-hour-long rant accusing this flick of being some sort of postmodernist propaganda, it must have left the political pandering to a tasteful minimum and excelled at everything else, so much so that all of these autists were forced to bite their tongue and just not make a video. I was ready to be inspired. I was ready to be amazed. I was ready to... And there's a mention of slavery in the first 60 seconds. Great. Just in case you forgot that slavery was a thing. Really important to really shove that in there in case we all forgot. So right at the minute mark, I already knew what I was in for, and after finishing the movie, I took a little time to think about why I didn't see the Autism Brigade of YouTube starting a shitstorm over this. And after a while, I finally figured it out, I think. They had nothing to say about this movie specifically because they are the Autism Brigade of YouTube. This, as a matter of fact, is exactly what happened with the Ghostbusters reboot. A movie that was laughed at for months in anticipation of its sucking was god-awful when it finally hit theaters, only for the people you would expect to hate it the most go, it was alright. But it wasn't. It wasn't alright, it was a flaming pile of shit. And just like that awful movie was passed off as mediocre, this mediocre movie gets the undeserved label of being nearly perfect because 90% of the people who should criticize it are already in the hole for it, while the remaining 10% are as dumb as bricks. Because you see, the problem is that people who spend their days running YouTube channels that revolve mostly around yelling at women and talking about forming a white ethno-state out of their mother's basement, for all their posturing about the superiority of Western culture, don't actually know what good art is or how to critique it. So it falls to me, your hero, to tell you why Black Panther is one of the most overrated movies ever made, and also not say the N-word a single time. I won't say the N-word at all, promise. Not gonna say the N-word. But anyway, it all comes down to this movie having a structural, narrative, and to a lesser degree, a setting problem. But let's start at the beginning of this movie and work our way through it semi-chronologically, and stop to point out the problems along the way. So the movie starts off with
millions of years ago, a meteorite made of vibranium.
We get some exposition about Wakanda, a reminder that slavery happened, and then we see a character who is clearly planning a robbery, which doesn't make any sense if you've already seen the rest of this movie, but by the time you see the other half of this flashback in a later scene, everyone has already forgotten about that. A lot of the movie has this problem, where things only make sense if you don't know what happens next, or if you forgot what happened previously. Things just happen for the audience to see them, because they look cool or build tension, or set something up for later, even if they contradict things that happen at other points of the movie. But they hope you won't notice, so I guess it's fine. So then the bank robber's brother shows up, and we find out that this guy is a prince who was sent here to spy on black people in Oakland, despite there being nothing to spy on there and him being the king's brother. He also talks to his brother in a really formal way, even though in the rest of the movie everyone is super casual with the royal family, so there's no reason for him to talk this way to his own brother unless they're doing it for the audience to know that he's royalty. And also, he stops talking to his brother that way once his brother introduces himself, so again, whoever wrote the script needed them to do this for the sake of the audience, but also relies on the audience having the short-term memory of a goldfish. But I said I wouldn't nitpick, okay? I said I wouldn't nitpick, so let's move on. So the flashback ends and the movie starts in earnest. We have a scene where T'Challa goes to take down some sort of slave training ring to find his ex-girlfriend who was undercover as a slave there and yet is wearing lipstick for some reason. Okay, no nitpicking in any case. His bodyguard, who flies their spaceship by meditating, and this is never used again, she tells him not to freeze when he sees her, but he does anyway, which also only makes sense if, again, you only watched this movie once and don't know yet that they used to fuck, so there's no reason for him to freeze up like she's his schoolboy crush. Anyway, there's a fight that's entirely too dark and over-edited for you to understand anything, and has no tension if you know that Black Panther's suit can't be hurt by bullets. And we also see Black Panther's balls. Someone on this movie set was really lazy because these tiny balls of vibranium do literally everything. They're EMPs, hologram projectors, communication devices, healing apparatuses, they control the trains, they do whatever the plot needs them to do, without anyone needing to put any extra work into thinking up, creating, or animating new props. In any case, they save the slave girls and go home, we see a bit of the villain stealing some shit somewhere, and T'Challa prepares to fight for his right to be king. Here that we have been fully introduced to Wakanda and how things work, it's a good time to talk a little bit about the setting. But before we can talk about the setting, there's something very important I need you to understand. Afrofuturism is stupid. Afrofuturism is one of the dumbest artistic genres to ever exist. For those who don't know, Afrofuturism is basically a sort of subgenre where people either combine futuristic technology with modern-day African culture or African American culture, or think up historical reimaginings where Africa is the most technologically advanced country in the world. It's all sort of like steampunk, but the only difference is that no one who's into steampunk takes steampunk this fucking seriously. No one actually believes there's a feasible alternate timeline where humanity would have created space-age technology using steam and superfluous gears glued to the outsides of otherwise perfectly functioning electronic devices. Conversely, people who like and make Afrofuturistic art seem to genuinely believe that if it had only not been for white people invading Africa, today the Dark Continent would simultaneously look like Neo-Tokyo while retaining almost every signifier of its native culture. The problem with Afrofuturism isn't Afrofuturism itself, which is an interesting aesthetic and occasionally narrative device. The problem with Afrofuturism is the people who like Afrofuturism and who, instead of treating it as an artistic tool to discuss social issues, treat it as 50% attainable future to strive for and 50% as a sad, deluded power fantasy for very dumb black militants. And don't get me wrong, Afrofuturism doesn't have to be bad. Most of what is considered Afrofuturism today is that in name alone, really, and consists mostly of hip-hop artists making music videos where they dress up as robots or some shit. And at its best, Afrofuturism can produce things like Deltron 3030 and Event Number 2, which are two of my favorite albums of all time. But at its worst, which is where Afrofuturism is most of the time, it's a pathetic, self-pitying circle jerk of nerdy black Israelites who think that black people are the master race and magic is real. It's what the Nation of Islam's religion would be if it was invented by a black William Gibson during a coke binge, and Black Panther itself really is Afrofuturism at its worst. The movie feels like a remake of that one Eddie Murphy movie where he's the king of some country by someone who watched it thinking it was a documentary, only this time with spaceships. Which is why, just like any sort of work inspired by this mindset, every person in Wakanda is impossibly virtuous and wise, but we'll get to that later. Right now, it's important to keep in mind that Afrofuturism doesn't make any sense, half the people who use and like it think it does make sense, and no movie exemplifies this problem better than Black Panther with its ridiculous setting. Aside from this, much of the setting's problems are there due to the fact that the characters of Black Panther were originally created by taking a bunch of vaguely African stereotypes and reimagining them as superpowers, which was a common practice back in the day, but ultimately ended up looking just kind of tasteless and insulting to us today. Black Panther comes from an era where comics were filled with literal yellow-skinned martial arts masters and other shit like that. Creating comic book characters in the 60s was basically like creating a wrestling persona in the 90s, where every now and then someone would come up with the brilliant idea of having a wrestler whose superior wrestling abilities come from being literally retarded. But today, writing a character like Black Panther the way it was originally conceived would be like creating an Australian superhero who gets his powers from huffing petrol, which give him the ability to be illiterate and induce abortions in pregnant women by throwing a dingo at them. Which is why, for this movie, they wisely decided to downplay a part of the comic where Black Panther's bodyguards are girls that the king takes from rival tribes to strengthen alliances and have them as possibly his wife. So now, his bodyguards in this version are the empowered heads of the army instead of the borderline sex slaves that they were originally conceived as. But that's not the only backwards part of Wakanda's supposedly enlightened and superior society. Because while the movie desperately tries to show us how much more advanced, both technologically and culturally, this African nation is, having been untouched by the white man, it's hard to ignore that it is only technologically advanced because of a gift that literally fell out of the sky and landed in their laps, and their culture is horrifying and primitive. Ultimately, the message of this progressive movie seems to be that even if a giant ball of infinite money and sci-fi technology literally fell from the heavens into black people's hands and they had thousands of years to build a society and culture around it, they would still end up creating an oppressive dictatorship where the royal family and their multiple slave wives live in opulence while the rest of the population herd goats and live in huts. They worship wild animals as gods that they think they could communicate with by taking hallucinogenic drugs given to them by their tribal shaman, and the line of succession is decided by a brutal fight to the death where they literally chuck spears at each other. So if you think about it, the idea of Wakanda isn't empowering as much as it is hilariously racist and incredibly insulting. But let's get back to the movie. So the plot continues and T'Challa wins the fight. He drinks the purple drink that gives him his powers after it had been removed from him previous to the fight to make it fair, and then he goes to visit his friend, and we establish that these two characters here are in love and that they have battle rhinos, and this is never brought up again until the end of the movie, so here I'd like to stop one more time and talk about lazy writing. This movie, just like the Ghostbusters remake, was originally 4.5 hours long. And just like that movie, it shows. It really shows. There were clearly plot lines that were left on the cutting room floor that they couldn't edit around. These two characters, for example, are in love, but the only reason we know that is because one of them literally calls the other one
my love,
so that the audience can hear it. Then, the only other interactions they have for the next 2 hours of this movie, before it becomes relevant to the plot again, is a single moment where they make eye contact with each other for about half a second. T'Challa's relationship with his love interest is just as hollow. The movie can't decide if they're estranged lovers who still have feelings for each other, or if T'Challa has a secret crush on her. It feels like there was a rewrite of the relationship at some point, and elements of the original weren't properly edited out of the final cut, so the first few scenes of the movie are a complete contradiction with the rest of it. Then there's Martin Freeman, who we are briefly told is a pilot, only for Shuri to reassure him at the climax of the movie that he is a good pilot so he could fly the plane to save Wakanda. And I am willing to bet anything that in an earlier version of this movie, this character probably was supposed to have some sort of subplot about his insecurities about flying after making some sort of mistake or something cliche like that. It's just shoved in there way too ham-fistedly. In fact, this character probably only exists so they can point to him and say, look, we're not saying all white people are bad, but he matters so little to the plot that at the end of the movie he walks off screen and everyone just forgets he exists. The movie is riddled with these sorts of half-finished plots and hollow characters that they probably intended to explore but didn't have the time for it in the end. So let's talk about Chekhov's gun for a moment. Everyone knows the old saying, if there's a gun hanging on the wall at the start of Act 1, someone should be shot with it by the end of Act 3. But I would add that this is not enough. If you're going to put a gun on the wall in Act 1 and have someone shoot it at the end of Act 3, there had better be someone in Act 2 that goes, boy, that sure is a big gun, I hope no one gets shot with it. It's a basic rule of storytelling. If you're going to use something, you need to set it up, remind people of it, and then you have to have it pay off. If you only do the first 2 parts without the payoff, the audience will be disappointed. You've blue-balled everyone for no real reason. If you remind people of something or have it pay off without ever establishing it, then it just comes out of nowhere and makes no sense. If you only do one of these 3 steps, it's just a meaningless detail that often makes even less sense. And if you only set something up just to have it pay off at the end without anything happening in the movie like this movie does, then it feels lazy and obvious. Like, you knew you wanted something specific to happen at the end of the movie, but were too lazy to organically weave it into the story, so you just lazily shoved it into the script at the beginning of the movie so that it doesn't come out of nowhere at the end of it. That's the problem Black Panther has. Things are set up ham-handedly, forgotten about for the rest of the movie, only to have meaning at the end in a way that makes it really obvious they were only written into the script originally so that they can show up somewhere later, and aren't really an integral part of the plot. It feels like having someone who is really bad at lying trying to pull a prank on you. You know, you're just sitting around minding your own business, and they come in and go, hey, could you wait for me in the other room and sit on a specific chair? And immediately it sets off alarms for you. You're like, why are you telling me to do this? Can't you just talk to me here? So, a bit unnerved, you stand up and you go to the other room, and the specific chair that they told you to sit on has an obvious whoopee cushion lying on top of it. This is what it feels like to watch this movie. So when the director tells me, hey, this character just called this other character my love, I can't help but roll my eyes when these 2 cardboard cutouts of characters who have no real relationship throughout the movie end up fighting at the movie's climax, and they expect me to feel something when one of them betrays the other, while literally having the character remind me that they're supposed to be in love with each other because it hasn't been mentioned again once in the last 2 hours, so they have to shoehorn it in here with the grace of trying to shove an entire cruise liner into a size 2 elegant high heel. But back to the movie, okay? So T'Challa needs to go hunt down the villain Andy Serkis, and we get like 4 cringy meme references and 1 joke stolen from The Simpsons all crammed into the span of like 20 minutes.
Guess what I call them? Sneakers.
I noticed Malloy wore sneakers. For sneaking.
And this never happens again after this, so it feels sort of like this entire script was written by a Hillary Clinton staffer, and the person who had to rewrite the entire thing missed one of the pages because they got stuck together, so now we have like 20 minutes of the original script, which was just memes every few minutes. So anyways, then they go to Korea, and everyone in Wakanda just seems to speak perfect Korean. I don't want to nitpick plot holes, but I just want to point out that this is another really lazy thing that writers do to try to show people that a character is really smart. It's just, have them speak perfect fluent languages that they have no business knowing. Only in this case, it's the worst possible example of this because it's also meant to show us how superior all the Wakandans are, to a point where everyone there speaks a bunch of random languages even though having a bunch of Africans know Korean is the most random thing you can think of. Like, do people in Wakanda know every single language on Earth? Or did they just happen to all know Korean? Is it just a coincidence that these 3 Wakandans all happen to... Why are they teaching Korean in Wakandan schools? This doesn't make sense, but I'm getting angry over nothing. Let's move on. Anyways, a fight breaks out and Bald Bitch remarks that guns are primitive as another subtle dig to show us how much more advanced the Wakandans are literal seconds before chucking a spear at someone. They arrest Andy Serkis, who has a South African accent, real subtle, really slipped that one in there. They take him for questioning, and the lady here in the background is super distracting because she's talking to herself. I guess someone told the extras to act natural, so she's standing here talking to a wall. Anyways, then Bilbo Baggins gets hurt during Gollum's escape, and they take him to Wakanda, where T'Challa's sister asks him why they brought her another broken white boy to fix. Not really sure why she needed to point out his race. Like, if the situation was reversed, and she was like, why'd you bring this N-word here, it would be a really strange remark. Just want to point that out. Then we switch back to Claw and Killmonger. By the way, I'm assuming you've all already seen this movie and I don't need to explain to you every detail like how Claw escaped or who Killmonger is. So Killmonger betrays Claw. They get into a gunfight, during which Killmonger shoots this chick who is supposed to be his girlfriend or something to show how ruthless he is, and we're expected to, I guess, care.
It's gonna be okay.
What you say? That you only meant well.
Shut the fuck up, no one cares.
Even though this is another one of those things that wasn't properly focused on, so her death means literally nothing to any of us. And I probably wouldn't even realize that they're supposed to be lovers if the writers didn't have Claw specifically point out that just before she died. There's a moment before that when we see the two of them kissing, but it's so brief I missed it like 3 times while watching this movie, because I was so bored I zoned out at this part, honestly, and I'm not even sure this character has a name. But here, the movie's bloat problem really makes it fall apart, because now, halfway into the movie, the main villain dies and the movie virtually restarts. And the film now has too many acts that it has to condense even further, something I've seen some people criticize Batman v Superman for, but the same people just seem to not notice a problem here. No prizes for guessing what were the political leanings of the people in question. Meanwhile, T'Challa finds out who Killmonger is and what happened in the rest of that flashback we saw at the start. And Forrest Whitaker explains to him that the King's brother went to America for some reason to spy on black people in Brooklyn for some reason, where he met some chick with a gender studies degree and her pussy was so good that he decided he needs to kill all the white people. That's really basically it. I'm not embellishing too much. He met some crazy leftist hoe, became her baby daddy, stole a bunch of vibranium, ironically with the help of a white guy. T'Chaka showed up, told him he knows what he did. Killmonger's dad spits out a bunch of inaccurate statistics like blacks are overpoliced and incarcerated, even though they are about 13% of the population, commit 50% of the crimes, and are only 40% of the US prison population, so if anything they are under-policed. But that's neither here nor there. Then he tells him that they should take over the world. He tries to kill young Forrest Whitaker. T'Chaka kills him instead in self-defense, and they decide to leave the son to die, so they don't need to tell anyone what happened, which, if you think about it, doesn't make a lot of sense. Because if he just explained what happened and takes the kid with him, everyone will understand. This is, he killed him in self-defense. This is why nitpicking is often pointless, but in some cases it's necessary, because sometimes the only way to make a plot work is to make a character make the obvious wrong decision without any logical reason for them to do that, or else the movie just stops. The movie never happens. if T'Chaka just made the logical decision that any person with a brain would have made in that position, the entire movie wouldn't happen. In any case, from this we learned that the biggest takeaway from this movie is you shouldn't fuck liberal women or they'll turn you into a giant racist. Let's continue. At this point, Killmonger shows up in Wakanda and meets the guy from Get Out at the border. He goes to the palace and challenges T'Challa to a fight. They fight, he kills Forrest Whitaker, and we're supposed to, it's supposed to be a big emotional moment, but no one cares as usual because he's another character that has had no development, no screen time, and no relationship with any other character. They fight some more. Killmonger wins, he throws him over the waterfall, and at this point the film has arrived at the narrative low point. And that lasts about 3 seconds before reaching the climax, much like having sex with me. But this is what I meant when I said that the film has a structural problem. It was so bloated with so many subplots and character motivations that the final cut not only waters down every single one of them to the point that they're meaningless, but also cuts down the low point of the movie to a mere 15 minutes in this 2-hour movie while trying to cram even more shit into it, like what's going on with Killmonger at the same time. This was supposed to be the part where the movie does its heavy lifting. The part where the hero is brought down to his lowest point and must undergo change to learn something new to overcome what he previously failed at. However, in this movie's low point, the hero spends 90% of it completely unconscious, the supporting cast flees Wakanda, T'Challa's ex, who is supposed to be a master spy, but this has so little development that the fact she's a trained spy and her ability to sneak back into the palace is the result of that, didn't even register with me until like the 3rd time I watched this movie, and I thought she was just able to sneak in there because she knows the way around the palace better than anyone, and this didn't require any special skills. Anyways, the whole spy thing is really thrown into the background to make her an action girl, but is never actually used for anything. Anyways, she sneaks back into the palace and successfully steals one of the last purple drank flowers before Killmonger burns it all. Then they go to M'Baku to offer him the purple drank flower so he can fight Killmonger. Then there's a moment where M'Baku and his friends make monkey noises at Martin Freeman and tell him that white people aren't allowed to talk. In a moment that I guess was supposed to stick it to the racist, but all the actual racists I've seen were just laughing at this moment because it's literally a scene where a bunch of black dudes are making monkey noises. Like, this is the worst way to stick it to them. It's a good thing that just like the slave wives element of the Black Panther mythos, whoever made this movie decided wisely that maybe it's not a good idea to use M'Baku's original name and costume design, which happened to be Man-Ape and a giant gorilla suit. And I have to say, in all the reviews by people who didn't like this movie, I saw a lot of people pointing out who their favorite character is and who their favorite actor was, as opposed to everyone else who they hated. This mostly revolved around an argument about whether T'Challa's sister is a good character with a good actress or an annoying character with an annoying actress, and I fell somewhere in the middle of this debate because I thought the character was annoying and the acting was bad, but she was obviously one of the only people really trying, and her interactions with T'Challa are the only character interactions that feel natural and they actually have some good chemistry unlike anyone else in this movie. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because if you ask me, the person who really steals this movie is M'Baku. Honestly, he's the best actor and the most entertaining character in this whole movie. I wish he had more scenes, and I would seriously watch an entire movie just about this guy. But getting back to the point, okay? M'Baku tells him that T'Challa is alive and they give him the purple drank flower to save him. While he's in the drug trance, he, I guess, meets his father in the afterlife. It's hard to tell if he's really meeting him in the afterlife or if this is a drug-induced delusion. I know this is a comic book movie and crazy shit just happens and we're supposed to accept it, but accepting that this isn't a drug-fueled hallucination means I have to accept that there's an actual Panther god in the MCU, and that just sounds a little bit too silly for me, so I prefer to pretend that he's just high and imagining shit. So T'Challa meets his ancestors and confronts them about leaving Killmonger in America, and I guess the entire Wakanda's isolationist culture that is the entire reason that the nation even exists, all of that is bad. Then he wakes up and he goes to fight Killmonger and he wins, even though literally nothing has changed since the last time they fought, which was either hours or weeks ago. The movie doesn't really make this clear, and it either took Killmonger less than a day to set up a worldwide invasion, or it took T'Challa's mom and sister weeks to walk over to the gorilla tribe. Either way, this part is especially poorly edited. But here's another point where the movie's writing really fails miserably, okay? Let's stop for a moment and think about the traditional 3-act structure. Now, I know this isn't set in stone, so this is a general outline that is executed pretty well in most Marvel movies. So, in Act 1, we establish the setting, we get some exposition, then an inciting incident happens and the protagonist begins trying to deal with it and sets the story into motion, establishing their goal in the movie. In Act 2, the protagonist either fails to achieve his goal and spends the rest of the act trying to get what he needs to accomplish it, or spends most of the act doing that only to fail when he finally confronts the problem because he's not ready. In either case, whether most of the middle part of the movie is a protracted low point or the low point happens right after this failure, this is the part where the hero must grow and change and overcome whatever it is that has been holding him back in the past, which gives him the ability to do something he couldn't do before, leading to his victory at the end of the climax in Act 3. But here's how the narrative arc works in Black Panther though. Act 1 establishes what it needs and gives us some exposition, so far so good. Then the inciting incident happens and the hero's goal seems to be set, catching Claw, only for the problem to resolve itself and for the movie to start over with a new antagonist, leaving the hero with no clear goal or internal struggle to overcome for the rest of the movie, which is like 3/4 over by now, meaning that the hero's new goal is just reacting to things as they happen, all of which are now crammed into what's left of the runtime. Then the part where the hero goes through his character development happens in a way that contributes nothing to solving the problem he's actually facing, and instead is just the director telling us that the hero is now stronger because he shares his views on globalism, and so he wins the end. This is idiotic. In every other Marvel movie, the protagonist has to actually change something about themselves that is relevant to the story to accomplish their goal. Thor must learn humility to be able to pick up his hammer. Peter Quill needs to learn the meaning of family and trusting others so they can all hold the Infinity Stone together without blowing up. Doctor Strange needs to let go of his pride and accept self-sacrifice to defeat Dormammu. This is just how it works. But what happens in Black Panther? Well, T'Challa changed his position from being tacitly anti-immigration to being vaguely in favor of it, and then that gives him the power to win the exact same fistfight he just lost 10 minutes ago, even though nothing has changed about him that would give him the ability to overcome whatever it is that was holding him back from winning the first time. The message of the film is not you can achieve anything if you believe in it yourself, it's not anything is possible if you work together. No, the message of this movie is you will become physically stronger if you let a bunch of illegal immigrants into your country. But it seems I've gotten ahead of myself and skipped right to the end of the movie, so let's back up for a moment. So while T'Challa was taking a nap, Michael B. Jordan was hard at work on his plan, which is take all the space-age lasers and spears they have in Wakanda and hand them out to black people in the hood and hope that they somehow overthrow the white people, I guess. I'm not sure how this is supposed to work though, and I'm pretty certain that the end result will be a bunch of liquor stores getting knocked over with photon beams before the police arrests everyone and takes their weapons away. But that's the plan. So T'Challa shows up out of literally nowhere, I mean literally nowhere. This plane crashes and somehow he's inside it, and it's not clear how he got there. But anyway, they fight. Most of the fight has zero tension because Black Panther has what I like to call the Superman problem, which is to say, you run into the same problem writing him that you do when you write Superman, since he is impossibly virtuous and his power has creeped so much over the years that it is nearly impossible to come up with anything that would pose a threat to him without retconning his power level, making him forget he has powers that could solve the problem instantly, making his enemies somehow stronger than him without them both destroying the planet with one punch, or coming up with some sort of MacGuffin like kryptonite to temporarily weaken him. Which is why this film needs to set up the magnetic train tracks that deactivate the Black Panther suit about an hour into the movie, otherwise their fight would go on literally forever, since their suits are literally impenetrable. In fact, the Superman problem is even worse with T'Challa because not only is he completely invulnerable when he's in his suit, to the point that even other vibranium weapons can barely give him a nudge, his suit actually absorbs blows landed on him and sends them back onto his opponents. So not only is it impossible to hurt him, even trying will reflect the damage back onto you. So At least Superman didn't insta-kill you the moment you tried to punch him. Your fist doesn't bounce off Superman's chest and hit you in the face, but it does with T'Challa. And when it comes to personality, it's even worse because T'Challa has none. At the very least, you can stump Superman with some sort of moral dilemma because of how he acts, but T'Challa is so devoid of character that I have no idea what to expect from him. So if he's faced with a hard choice, there's no reason for me to think he'll struggle with it. This part of his character is the result of this movie's fetishization of black people, I think. Again, since this is the worst type of afrofuturism, Wakanda's perfect culture, stemming from being untainted by the white man, produces impossibly noble and honorable people, and its ruler, therefore, doesn't have any of the flaws that other heroes have that they need to overcome, because that would almost be an attack on all black people. The only thing about T'Challa that is a character flaw, arguably, is him mildly disagreeing with the film's scriptwriters about foreign intervention, which isn't even a real character flaw. It's just the director's opinion that you're a bad person if you disagree with him, and even then, he couldn't commit to it, and at least make T'Challa some sort of ardent xenophobe for the first act or two of the movie so that at least his character development would have some sort of weight. Because if he did, that would mean having to put one of the black characters in the movie in a bad light without trying to justify their actions, which is something the people making this seem to be completely incapable of doing. But I'm getting off track. What I'm trying to say is that this really works against the movie. In a franchise that is built on entertaining character interactions, having the protagonist and his posse be humorless, emotionless drones, unable to make mistakes, means that whenever there's a scene where T'Challa's sister or M'Baku don't have any lines, I am literally falling asleep. And because of the suit, when it comes to this movie's climax, I feel absolutely no tension when T'Challa is lying on the ground and is surrounded by people trying to penetrate his high-tech armor with a bunch of fucking gardening tools. Okay, so the fight rages on and we get to the bit with the CIA pilot that I mentioned earlier. We see the rhinos that were only set up 2 hours ago so that they can show up now and do nothing of interest. Then the gorilla tribe shows up and I burst out laughing as Killmonger's army that he thought could take over the world using Wakanda's futuristic weaponry is annihilated by a bunch of buff black dudes carrying sticks. What the fuck was the plan here? Then we have Bald Bitch betraying her husband for Wakanda, like I mentioned earlier, which again has no narrative weight. Just like with Killmonger and his girlfriend, the script literally has to remind us that they're in love in case we forgot. Meanwhile, elsewhere, T'Challa and Killmonger are fighting. T'Challa inexplicably wins and Killmonger asks him to see the sunset before he dies, even though it's not exactly clear what time of day it is or how much time has passed between the different events of the movie, but I guess it's sunset time now. So T'Challa takes him outside and tells him he'll save his life and he'll face the court for his crimes. Then Killmonger drops what at first I thought was the dumbest line in the entire movie.
Just bury me in the ocean with my ancestors that jumped from the ships. Because they knew death was better than bondage.
If they jumped from the ships, how are they your ancestors, you retard? Didn't they drown? Also, they were jumping from the ship to escape slavery. You're not a slave. You're going to jail for the actual crimes that you actually committed. So the metaphor doesn't really work here. It sounds deep, but it makes no fucking sense. At least, that was my initial reaction. But then, I stopped to think about it for a second and I thought, wait a minute. Has he actually committed any crimes? I mean, let's think about it rationally. He's the son of the prince, he has a legitimate claim to the throne, he challenged T'Challa, T'Challa accepted, and then he won, making him king. Both M'Baku and the Bald Bitch point this out, in fact. Everything he did before winning was according to Wakanda's laws, and everything he did after winning was legal because Wakanda is a dictatorship, and as king, he can do whatever he wants. Now, you might say he's not king because T'Challa didn't lose, but that's not true. T'Challa cheated. He should have died when he fell from that waterfall. M'Baku even says that if they move his body out of the ice he's been keeping him in, he'll be dead within seconds. So if it wasn't for outside interference, he would be dead. In fact, the only reason he lives is because they give him more of the purple drink, and the exclusion of that is a prerequisite for the fight for succession being legitimate. So T'Challa is disqualified. Killmonger didn't break any laws. Killmonger acted in his capacity as king under the presumption that T'Challa died. He cancelled the tradition of the fight for the throne, which makes him less of a savage than the people of Wakanda, meaning he doesn't have to accept T'Challa's challenge anymore. And even if you say that doesn't count because he's not king until T'Challa is dead, the only reason he's not dead is because he cheated. T'Challa is the real criminal. He is the illegitimate usurper to the throne, and now he wants to put the legitimate king of Wakanda in prison after a show trial to secure his rule. Killmonger did literally nothing wrong. And so, the movie ends. Killmonger is dead, T'Challa is reunited with his girlfriend, I think. I'm not really sure because they have so little chemistry and she has so little personality that even after watching this movie like 5 times, I'm not 100% sure that the romantic subplot is ever resolved because near the end of the movie I keep sort of tuning out. Then T'Challa buys up some buildings in a slum, and the movie ends with an insulting stereotype of a black kid for some reason.
Hey look, we can break it apart, we can sell it on eBay.
That's still my money, nigga.
That was a great choice. Oh, and there's a post-credits scene where T'Challa talks to the UN and says that leaders build bridges, not walls, as a sort of jab at Trump, I guess.
And for the first time in our history, we will be sharing our knowledge and resources with the outside world.
1 week later.
Open Northwest Section 17.
Requesting confirmation, my king. You said open the barrier?
On my signal.
This will be the end of Wakanda.
And the lesson of the movie is that immigration is good, isolationism is bad, the end. But is it? Is it really? Are walls and isolationism really bad? I don't mean in real life, I mean within the context of this movie. I know it's not fair for me to argue back against the point of this movie using outside information. I mean, you can give an 8-hour lecture about the themes discussed in the film and still not convince anyone, so I can't expect a children's movie, which this is a children's movie, to structure an irrefutable argument in support of open borders that can hold up in the face of real-world statistics, which is why I'll only judge the arguments that this movie is making by its own merits in universe. So, what is the argument? Well, a good way to look at it is like this. Throughout the movie, T'Challa encounters various characters whose views are somewhere on a spectrum of isolationism and traditionalism on one end, and a complete rejection of tradition in support of foreign interventionism on the other. T'Challa is at the center, leaning closer to the traditional side at the start of the movie, and is at the center but leaning closer to the left at the end. Along this spectrum, the other characters are his mother and sister who have hardly any opinions on the matter. His mother is a bit more traditional, I guess, but makes no real strong statements either way aside from telling him to remember who he is in the first fight as a sort of example of a good version of preserving one's culture, and his sister on the other side being indifferent to white people in her country aside from some racist remarks, but not really having any strong opinions either way as well. T'Challa's father is a little more traditional, believing they must keep Wakanda isolated and secret at almost all costs, and M'Baku is even more isolationist and traditional, so much so that his tribe isolates themselves from the rest of Wakanda, and one of the only things he says to explain why his tribe hates the rest of Wakanda is pointing out that T'Challa's sister scoffs at tradition. Oh, and I guess T'Challa's bodyguard is also a traditionalist to some degree, being loyal to whoever sits on the throne regardless of her feelings about them, because it's tradition. Anyways, on the other side we have T'Challa's ex, who tells him that Wakanda is strong enough to preserve its culture and help others. Further than that, there's the Get Out guy, who tells T'Challa that they should invade other countries and I guess help them by making them more like Wakanda. It's not really pointed out, but it's sort of implied. And at the edge of the spectrum is Killmonger, who has no respect for tradition at all and believes that Wakanda should rule the world, unite all black people, and kill all the crackers. Oh, and I guess Killmonger's dad is also somewhere in this area, and Claw isn't on the spectrum because he represents the bad people that Wakanda needs to protect itself from. At the end of the movie though, Killmonger is dead, Get Out Guy is defeated, the bald bitch decides it's okay to reject tradition in the name of the greater good, M'Baku sort of stops being an isolationist but not really, and T'Challa decides to side with his ex and says that Wakanda will offer other countries aid, but also is a little bit maybe influenced by Killmonger because he seems to only be offering aid to other black people. Anyways, so the movie ends with the conclusion that isolationism and nationalism are bad, war is bad, conquest is bad, radical identitarianism is bad, but things like foreign aid and implicitly immigration are good. And also, it vaguely pays some sort of lip service to the idea of traditionalism being maybe sort of okay and honoring your racial cultural heritage is also maybe good but only for black people because I guess they have to because that's part of the genre, and it's not in any explicit way because they had no idea how to make this work or work it into the movie, and it's completely at odds with every other major theme. But traditionalism is good, but only if you're African, I guess. A little bit, except all the other times when it's always bad. Whatever. So again, is the movie right? The people who like it would say no. Because according to black people on Twitter near the time of this movie's release, like me, they believe that Killmonger did nothing wrong. However, unlike me, and despite the movie explicitly trying to explain to them that starting a race war is actually a bad thing, black Twitter believes that Killmonger did nothing wrong because all he wanted to do was, start up a Holocaust. And the movie implying that that's a bad thing for him to do, well that's the real problem. There were actual articles written about this. About Killmonger is not wrong for wanting to exterminate entire races. But I have a completely different and less retarded reason for why I think this movie fails to prove its point. The real issue is that the movie is trying to tell me that all these things are good, immigration, foreign aid, not being isolated and so on, then within the universe of the film, everything points to that being completely false. Like, look at Wakanda for a second, okay? By closing itself off to the outside world and strictly safeguarding its culture, the Wakandans have created the most advanced civilization on Earth. Well, it's sort of, technologically. The movie tries to convince me that their culture is also advanced, but it kind of isn't. But in the context of the movie, they're the most technologically and culturally advanced culture in the world. Okay? But the movie tries to convince me that they should stop being isolationist, despite that being the only reason that they're this successful and that this would be good for them? I'm not going to talk about how if they had done that in the past, Wakanda would have never existed. Okay, it's stupid for me to speculate about the possible alternative history of a fictional country by comparing it to real-world history. So let's only look at things we know about Wakanda, okay? So the movie tells me that Wakanda can and should open itself up to the rest of the world. How has that worked out for them thus far? Well, let's see. The one guy who crossed their borders and lived to tell the tale killed the parents of one of the royal tribe's families. Then he stole their vibranium and became a perpetual nuisance for them for 30 years. The second time in Wakanda's history that someone enters their borders illegally and isn't immediately killed, who wasn't even really a foreigner, he overthrows the king, almost murders the royal family, burns their irreplaceable source of the Black Panther's powers, and tries to start a world war. Now, the excuse I heard some people make about this, at least in Killmonger's case, is that the movie explicitly states that Killmonger is a monster of their own creation, which is indeed the lampshade that the scriptwriters try to throw over the obvious argument that Killmonger only proves that involving yourself with the outside world will end badly. The implication of this one lies that had Wakanda offered other countries aid, and had it cared for the fate of other people, mostly exclusively black people, then Killmonger would have never become Killmonger. And so globalism and Pan-Africanism are actually good, checkmate bigots. On a metaphorical level, the implication is also that terrorism and criminal Mexican gangs are America's fault for not redistributing its own wealth to other nations. So, are the people who made this movie correct? Was Killmonger a product of their own indifference that could have been avoided if Wakanda was not as closed off? Well, in-universe, Yes, actually, they're actually right, but not for the reasons that they think. Because thus far, I've only talked about borders. So instead for a moment, let's talk about culture. The only two people who entered Wakanda caused massive damage, but one of the few people to leave it did the exact same thing. N'Jobu, the king's brother. The film wants you to believe that opening itself up to the world would be a net benefit to Wakanda, but even the brother of the king of Wakanda, who should be most engrossed in Wakanda's culture, only needed to get one whiff of leftist pussy to turn traitor. So, not a good track record there. All evidence points to Wakanda's success being a result of them remaining insular and hidden. Hell, even T'Challa's dad only died because he was speaking at the UN. He'd probably still be alive if he just stayed his ass home and didn't involve Wakanda in international politics. But what of Killmonger? I said people who say that Killmonger is a product of Wakanda's indifference were sort of right, didn't I? Well, they are, but their solution is wrong. What the movie hints at is that without black poverty, Killmonger would never have become Killmonger, which is why Wakanda should use its resources to help blacks around the world. But wouldn't he have also never become Killmonger if T'Chaka just took him back to Wakanda? I mean, him leaving Killmonger there to keep his brother's death a secret instead of explaining it, as I already pointed out, makes no sense in the first place. He could have just told everyone it was self-defense and taken the child with him. And if the movie is trying to imply that he left Killmonger in Oakland because he's so averse to letting outsiders into the country, making it, again, the fault of his extreme nationalism, then it's taking it to such a comical extreme that it isn't in line with the character who we are supposed to believe is rational and wise, and not a frothing at the mouth xenophobe. So if T'Chaka didn't act like a crazy person for that one scene, just so that the movie could happen, then the logical solution to prevent the Killmonger problem wouldn't have been to leave him in America, and then turn all black neighborhoods into a paradise. The smart solution would have been to take him home with them and educate him to become the same sort of fierce nationalist that the rest of the Wakandans are, which wouldn't have been very hard since Wakanda is apparently so great. And since without Killmonger there wouldn't be anyone else in the outside world who knows about Wakanda and could invade it, the problem would have been solved. It's not like someone else would have become a Killmonger-esque villain and attack Wakanda, since none of the poor black people who might theoretically resent Wakanda for not handing out any give-me-dats to them would have even known Wakanda exists. By the movie's own logic, traditionalism and isolationism would have been what would have saved the day, and any deviation from that will always and has always ended up in disaster for Wakanda. The point is that the film is written to support T'Challa's views at the end of the movie that Wakanda should open itself up to the rest of the world, but it fails to make an argument for why he's right. At the end of the film, T'Challa changes his mind about keeping Wakanda secluded, and we are supposed to agree with him because he's the hero. And if that doesn't convince you, him winning the fight after changing his views is proof that he's right. It's based on a typical movie structure, but without a key element. The movie just tells you he's right because he won. He's the good guy, therefore his opinions are good and you should agree with him. But that's not an argument. In fact, the things he rejects make a lot more sense. Wakanda would be better off either remaining hidden or conquering the world rather than exposing itself to thieves and foreign cultures that are inferior to its own and flaunting its wealth so that more people will try to steal it. So not only is the conclusion that T'Challa comes to at the end of Black Panther just the director's own shoehorned in opinion that doesn't follow within the narrative structure of the movie, it's also the wrong conclusion. Everything within the fucking movie that is trying to promote this worldview points to T'Challa's new policy ultimately leading to the destruction of Wakanda. So far, 2 people who should not have known about Wakanda knew about Wakanda. 1 person who should have been exposed to the culture outside of Wakanda was exposed to it, and all 3 of them caused untold damage to this otherwise perfect nation. What do you think will happen to Wakanda when everyone knows about Wakanda, and all of its citizens intermingle with crazy leftist bitches? It's going to become fucking Zimbabwe. So, in conclusion, is Black Panther a bad movie? No. Is it a good movie? Depending on what you're trying to get out of it. Is it the best Marvel movie? No, that would be Guardians of the Galaxy. Is it the worst Marvel movie? Also no, that would be Winter Soldier, which is painfully boring. I mean, at least until they make a Black Widow movie. I mean, yeah, let's make a movie about everyone's least favorite Avenger with no powers or personality. I'm sure that'll turn out great. Ultimately, Black Panther is an overstuffed film with too many things going on that had so much of it cut that half a dozen subplots feel like a last-minute addition. Most of the cast have no chemistry with one another and no personality, besides boring, virtuous black man. Some of the CGI and green screen look like complete crap because the special effects team got pulled mid-production to work on Infinity War. The political messaging is ambitious in its complexity even if it's wrong, but it disrupts the hero's narrative arc and is at odds with itself by the end of the movie. All in all, it's fine if you have low standards and just want to watch an action flick. But I did some thinking, and I know how you could fix this movie, okay? I know how you could take the director's ham-fisted political posturing and put it into the movie in a way that would work and everyone would be satisfied with it. Everyone who jerked off to this movie would be even more happy about it, okay? So follow me here. Imagine this movie, okay? Imagine being exactly the same. The only difference is that it's set in 2016, okay? Up until the 2-hour mark, everything progresses the same way that it did in the first movie, but when T'Challa fights Killmonger, imagine this, okay? Okay, just imagine this, okay? They fight. First the fight seems equal, but then T'Challa is knocked down. He gets up, but Killmonger knocks him down again. Killmonger turns to the crowd to celebrate his inevitable victory. T'Challa is wounded. He must draw new strength to save himself. Accepting illegal immigration isn't going to cut it this time. He turns over on his stomach. Still bleeding, he begins to crawl. He claws towards dry land, slowly bringing himself closer to salvation. Nearly dying, with his last breath, he raises his hand into the air and puts a ballot into the ballot box for Hillary Clinton. Suddenly, his thoughts return to him, more than he had ever had when drinking the purple drink. He gets up. "Not so fast, Killmonger," he says. "Or should I say, Donald Trump? Dun dun dun. Ha ha ha! You have found me out," Killmonger says as he rips off his mask, revealing underneath that he is actually Donald Trump. But then, he reaches for his face again and removes his second mask, and underneath, it's Adolf Hitler. Then T'Challa pulls off his mask, and he's actually Hillary Clinton. They fight. Hillary picks him up over his head. She throws him down the waterfall. She wins. Hillary wins. She did it. I'm with her. Black Panther wins the Oscar. Wakanda is now real. Donald Trump is dead. Fade to black. Roll credits.